Good morning.
Good morning. I'm just waiting a couple seconds for you to join the meeting. Okay, guys. So before we start, I have an announcement. So I wanted to say that we are going to have a midterm. While we still don't have the exact date, so I'm waiting from the study office for them to set up like the date in your schedule where we will be able to have it. So the plan is to have it during the 5th week. So it's like today is our third lecture, right? So first lecture we have online, but it was live. Then the second week you study by yourself. Today is the third week. We have the third lecture, and then one lecture, and then the midterm is coming, right? So I want to warn you so that be aware, right? So the time flies. So with that, so I hope you are on schedule and everything is good. If you have any questions, so please feel free to ask me. And with that, I'm going to start the lecture. So I will share the slides. Okay. And let me start the recording. Okay. So let us move on and start with our third lecture. So the topic is fiscal federalism. So before we talked about public goods, right, and local public goods, and today we're going to talk about how the provision of public good is actually implemented in practice. What are like the structure of government that we actually have that is useful for the implementation of the public good. And so fiscal federalism is like the structure that we will learn and deal with that, right? So what is fiscal federalism? It's the division of revenue collection and expenditures responsibility between different levels of government. What are the different levels of government? It's actually a hierarchical system of government, and we probably you probably didn't thought about that before, but you are all very well familiar with that kind of thing, with that concept. So because we all live in city, and that city belong to like a region or district, and then districts belong to like state or oblast in Russia, and then this belong to a country, a nation, right? So what is this? It's overlapping administration that governs that hierarchical system. And we as economic agents simultaneously belong to multiple jurisdictions. And how this is important for our course? It's important because each level of the government has restriction on the tax and expenditure instrument it can employ. For example, the central government can usually choose any tax instrument, but focuses on national defense, the provision of law and order, infrastructure, and transport. State governments usually levy property, commodity, and local income taxes and focuses on education and local infrastructure. While I give some examples, this could vary among countries, but like approximately on average, right? And local governments, they service such as rubbish collection and park maintenance, the police and fire services could be at the local level or actually might be at the state level. So this is like the hierarchical structure system of government that we live in. But once we start think about that structure, some questions arise in our head, right? Why should there be more than one level of government? Right? How are the functions of government allocated between the levels? And eventually, is this outcome efficient? Right? Those questions that are important, and we're going to give some answers to those questions. So, but before we provide rationale for a multi-level government, we need to answer a preliminary question. Specifically, when a centralized government or decentralized system of governance works better. What does it mean works better? We actually care about provision of the public good, right? And to decide whether a public good should be provided by centralized government or by decentralized system of government, we need to weigh pro and cons of both systems. So let's do that. So first, let us discuss factors in favor of centralized system. So first, important factor is economies of scale. What is it? So when a public good provided by centralized government, it actually means that it's cheaper, right? And this is basically, we need only one government, right? Rather than we need to have multiple government in each jurisdiction, right? And having a government like is costly, right? So we will discuss this more later, but like we need to pay politicians, we need to organize their office and stuff like that, right? So there are costs, right? And it's when we have just centralized system of government with one government there, right? It's just cheaper. Then the second factor in favor of centralized system is internalizing externalities. What does it mean? Let us think. When we have several jurisdictions, and then one public good in one jurisdiction can provide some externalities on people in other jurisdictions. There could be good externalities or bad externalities. For example, if we have constructed some factory that produce a lot of like, I don't know what, poisoning or not very healthy gases, right? So then if this factory is on a border of another region, that certainly, you know, the very classical example, it's produce externality on the other regions. roads, right? So in one region there are good roads, and people when from other region, when they come to this the first region, they will be better off from like using the good roads in the neighborhood region, right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Could you please one more time clarify what is internalizing? So
Internalizing, right? So internalizing, it's basically meaning taking into account that there are such an externality exist, and then making when you make a decision, you understand that these externalities exist, and you um, mm, uh, care not on about the effect on just one region, but the whole effect on the full nation, right? So it's
something
kind of
like planning
yes,
externalities, right?
yeah, you can say it that way.
Okay.
So then, okay, then the third factor here is coordinations. It's kind of similar, but some at the same time different than externalities. But like the example with roads would work here. So if you build roads, it's better to build roads when you coordinate them between regions, right? So it's like, so I hope it's clear. Then let me describe the factors in favor of local governments, or we call this decentralized system of government. So first, important factor is that there is more precise information available on local preference and local circumstance at the local level, and then it's easy to match preferences, heterogeneities, and therefore get a more efficient decision. Right? A related point here is that if we recall the taboo model, right? So then, and if we rely on that idea, that hypothesis, and we know that with heterogeneous preferences, efficiency requires multiple communities that offer different levels of public good. Right. So then, from that that point, right? Again, if there are heterogeneity of preferences, the decentralized system provides a more efficient provision of public good. Then another factor here that is called direct tax benefit linkages. And it's mean that when residents view their tax payment as directly tied to goods and services that they receive, they will be willing to pay local taxes rather than just to pay national tax, and that is kind of not that directly tied, directly related to the goods and services they receive while living at their community, locality, or region, right? So, like, then the other factor here is better control of agency problems. So then, if the provision of public good would be at the central level, then political pressure may prevent differentiation of provision between communities. So it's easy from the political perspective to differentiate provision of the public good when it's provided by decentralized system of government. So those are the kind of probably key factors, right? And a multi-level government then better serves the role of improving efficiency and equity in the case if we have both factors, right? So on the one hand, we have factors in favor of the centralized government, which is existence of economies of scales, existence of externalities among region. But on the other hand, we also have imperfect information, heterogeneity in preferences, and direct tax benefit linkages, right? Then if we have like this mix of the factors, it's better to have a multi-level government and have a division of responsibilities between those government. As we discussed, the central government is in charge of decision about public good which serves the entire economy, right? And usually it's defense and law system. And then local government in charge of local public good that benefit only those residents within a defined geographical area. And this is usually how it works, but the precise design of the structure of government then emerged from a trade-off between increasing the number of levels, right, to ensure decisions are made at the correct point, and the resource benefit of having fewer levels. So this is like kind of the key idea, and we will now build on this idea a little bit more. So the uniform provision of public goods and services meet the needs of the population when preferences are homogeneous, and when preferences are heterogeneous, the uniform provision of public goods involves some laws in welfare relative to differentiated provisions. So here is an example, right, to kind of actually stress or illustrate that point. So let's us assume that there are two groups of consumers. We will denote them by A and B with different preferences. And the number of consumers in these two groups we will denote by NA and NB. And so the public good in this country is financed by an income tax at rate T. And then the preferences of those consumers are described by the utility function, and the utility function of a typical consumer of a group I with income yi is given by equation 1. So it's ui that depend on the consumption of the private good, and the money that left on the private good is 1 minus t multiplied by I, right? So it's kind of with the budget constraint. And then the utility also depend on the public good G. The amount of public good in this country is equal to G, amount of public good is G, and it's basically the money collected from the taxes, right? The tax revenue, and it is equal to number of people in group A, and A multiply the tax rate T multiply the income of people in the first group, which is YA, plus the same thing for the second group, and B multiply tax rate T multiply income YB. And what we can do is we can get rid of the tax rate T and expressing it from the equation second, and plug it back into the utility function, right? So it depends only on the amount of public good G. Why do we do that? is just to focus on the effects produced by the public good G, right? You see that the more public good G, there are two effects of that, right? First of all, the utility is directly depends on the public good G because people value it, but at the same time, in order to provide that public good, they need to pay higher taxes, and higher taxes means less money on the private good. So this is kind of a negative effect on the utility of having more public good. So let's now assume that Group B have a relatively stronger preferences for the public good than Group A. And specifically, the preferred choices of public good provision are GA and GB, such that GA is less than GB. So if we now consider a uniform level of provision of public good G0 and assume that it lies somewhere between GA and GB, then we can write an expression for the loss of welfare to a society, right, from this uniform provision. And specifically what we do is we calculate the difference between utilities UA of GA minus UA of G0 and multiply the number of people in this group NA, right, and do the same for the second group A and B, multiply the difference between UBGB and UBG0. So here's a graph that is going to illustrate what we just described mathematically. So this inverse U-shape lines represent the kind of indifference curves of the of a person in group A and of a person in group B. Right, and as we presume, right, the second people in the second group, they like public good more. So this is illustrated by the fact that the optimal level of GB that they would prefer by themselves, right? So if they would choose a public good only for within their group, the optimal level of public good for them would be GB. On the other hand, right, if people in group A would choose public good by themselves, they would choose level GA. But because these two type of people live in one community, right, and if the public good is provided by a centralized government, so if there is a uniform level of the public good, then we see it's like lie eventually, right, lies somewhere between G and GB, and there is always some loss into this society, welfare loss, because if we try to move G0 closer to the GA point, right, then people in group A kind of feels better, right, get high social welfare, but then people in group B suffer, and there's always like somebody who end up with utility losses here. And sorry, let me go back to the slide and to say that the welfare loss can be minimized by an appropriate choice of G0, but it cannot be eliminated, right? So, we see thus that the cost of centralization arises because of heterogeneity in preferences, or other way it could be differences in endowments. Right? So this is kind of relatively clear point, and we illustrated it with this straightforward example. But right, the solution could be okay. There is a cost of uniformity, or cost of centralized provision of the public good, but there are also some costs of decentralization as well, right? So on the other hand, there are costs of decentralization. A specific introduction of a new government level involves additional administration costs, right? Building, staff, equipment, as well as elections to choose politicians and compensation to politicians for the time devoted to political activities, right? All this is costly, and these costs are replicated each time an additional level of government is introduced, right? Now we are going to have a model that's going to trade off those two costs, right? Costs of uniformity versus cost of decentralization. Or specifically, we will consider allocation model that trade-off scales economies against diversity of preferences. Right, so it's an interesting model, but probably not that typical model that you saw, right? What do I mean? Let's see. The federation is modeled, right? So the country is modeled as a line segment from 0 to 1, with points on the line representing people's geographical locations. So let me show you the graph, right? So this is basically the line segment from 0 to 1, right? And each point on this line represents kind of a person, right? So person lives at different points on this line, and at each point there is a person. So the public good can be located anywhere along the line, and with the central provision, right, when we have a centralized government, the public good is located at the middle at point 1/2. Under decentralized provision with two governments, right, those two regions supply public good, and region L, which is kind of left region, that is left interval from 0 to 1/2, and the right region, which is region R, that is right interval from 1/2 to 1, right? So each region provides its own public good, and public good is located at the midpoint of each interval. Specifically, it's 1/4 in the left region and 3 at the point 3/4 in the right region. Okay, and the other thing is that there is a fixed cost C, capital C, per capita of providing the public good at the central level, and due to duplication the cost is 2C with decentralized provision. Okay, so here is the simple illustration, right? So on the top figure, right, with the centralized provision of the public good will be located exactly at the middle of this interval at point 1/2. On the bottom figure, right, with two regions, Each region provide its own public good, right? And the left region, again, it's at the middle of the region, but of this smaller region, right? In the left region, it's produced at the 0.1 force, and in the right region at the 0.3 force. Okay, I hope you're with me. So let's now talk about individuals. So individuals, yes.
Excuse me. This
Mm-hmm.
this line is the idea of the model, all right?
Yeah. So it's kind of,
Okay.
we usually does not think about the geographical location of the people, right? But here we care about these things, and so we exactly model. Um, so, and we kind of think that each point is a location of a person, or like maybe several persons, but it's kind of a house is built there, and then the neighbor house is like right at the, because there is a continuum of points, right? It's kind of a little bit difficult to talk with um, mm, uh, in terms of real life examples, right? But it's kind of like people live next to each other, right, on the line.
Okay. If I'm standing at the right end of the line, so in
Mm-hmm.
point one, uh, does that mean that all of my observed individuals live in one point or not? What does it mean? So the
You kind of imagine this. This is like the town consists of just one street,
okay,
right?
so
And people live along this street, right?
mhm.
And like there is like just houses built next to each other along this street, and like in each this house there is a person, and there is like the street starts at point zero and ends at point one, and all the people live inside of this street.
Okay, so at the point, how can I interpret the meanings for public good? So that in the left region it's 0.25, and in the right region it's
Yeah,
zero
but like
point
then think about they now build a mm,
school.
let's it be school, right?
Okay,
So it's yeah.
okay, I see. Thank you.
Yeah, this the only like mm, complication that that's like there is like an infinite number of points, right? So it's like they live very very close to each other, and
Yes,
but
I
this
got
is the
it.
model. Okay, so here it's important that individuals are assumed to be uniformly distributed so that both regions are of equal size, right? So uniform distribution is mean that there is like each point have the same number, like if you can say this, right? The same number of people. But I hope you're familiar with like distribution, right, from the statistics class, and uniform distributions mean that the density of people in each point is the same for each point of the line. Then with the central provision of the public good is located at point one half, we know that, but then the further away from this point individuals are located, the less they like the public good provided at the federal level, right? So what's matter is the distance between you and the say school and the public good, right? The further away you're located there, the less you like it. the lowest utility from this public good. And we will model this in the following way. So under centralization, the utility function of individual located at I is given by equation 5. So let us look at it. So UI C, right, meaning that U of individual I under centralization is equal to 1 minus coefficient alpha multiplied the absolute difference between 1/2 and I. So this absolute difference represents how far away you from the public good. Public good is located at 1/2 and U is located at point I. So we take the absolute difference. This is how far away you from the public good. Then multiply by some coefficient, right, that probably represent how strongly you dislike being far away from the public good, and subtract from 1. And the last term in the utility function is minus C. So this is the cost of providing the public good, right? The same idea how we construct utility function under the decentralization, right? So here the utility function depends on whether you live in the left region or right region, right? So so if I is between 0 and 1/2, so you live in the left region, so then utility is 1 minus alpha, multiply the absolute difference between 1/4 and I minus 2C. Again, the same idea. So what's matter is the difference, absolute value of the difference between the point 1/4, where the public good is located, and your location, right? And 2C, the cost of providing the public good, represent that it's basically the same public good, but there is twice less people that finances public good. This meaning that each person have to pay twice more, right? And for an individuals from the right region, exactly the same idea, and the utility function is equal to 1 minus alpha, multiply the absolute difference between 3/4 and I, and then minus 2C. Okay.
Yeah. So in case of centralized system, public pays only for one school, and under the assumption of decentralized system, public needs to pay for two schools, right?
Yes, but each region, now, like decentralizations mean that each region provide its own public good, right? So they're like, it's kind of they divide it, and left region, like now, like there's not a uniform country, but there is like two regions within the country, and each region decides to build its own school.
So it's the question: what is more significant, paying for extra school, or living further from the one school?
So now it's just the settings. So the questions would be, so what is optimal, right, from the social perspective? And then you will see in a couple of slides, if the people now decide by themselves what to choose, centralized provision or decentralized provision, like, right, having one central government or decentralized system of government, what will they choose, right? And we will compare the social optimal versus kind of decentralized decision of people. So let's start from discussing the social optimal design. The social optimal solution, we will assume that it's maximizes the sum of all individual utility. When I say sum, in this case, it's actually mean integral, right? Because, like, as I mentioned, there is like a continuum of people in the country. So let us first calculate the social welfare under centralization. So for that, we will need to sum up the utilities of all people, which actually mean, like mathematically means that we should integrate by I, where I goes from 0 to 1 of the utility UI, right, which is 1 minus alpha multiplied the absolute difference between 1/2 and I minus C. So you will discuss how to calculate this integral. So you should know how to calculate this integral, but you will also work on this during the seminar, right? So like to kind of refresh your knowledge. And once you do that, you will see that it's equal to 1 minus alpha divided by 4 minus C, right? So then what we need to do is calculate the social welfare under decentralization. Here we have two regions, but what is helpful is that they are kind of symmetric, right? So what's matter is the distance between the middle point and the point where an individual lives, right? All other are they like just coefficients or constants, right? Therefore, what we can do is just we can calculate the social welfare in the left region and then multiply it by 2, so we account for the right region as well, right? So just double. So then the social welfare is equal to, as I already explained to you, multiply the integral that represent the social welfare in the left region, and it is an integral from 0 to 1/2, where we integrate over I of the utility Qi, which is equal to 1 minus alpha multiplied the absolute difference between 1/4 and I minus 2C. Again, once you calculate it, it's equal to 1 minus alpha divided by 8 minus 2C. So we now know what is the social welfare under centralization and social welfare under decentralization. So we can now compare those two basically numbers, so basic two expressions, right? And obtain that decentralization is optimal if and only if the cost C is less or equal than alpha divided by 8, right? So just simply solving an inequality constraint. But this is very intuitive result, right? So why? Because if we would think about when it's optimal to have centralization rather than decentralization, it's probably when it's not that costly to have to kind of finance the government, right? So those costs of duplicating the public good. And this is indeed the case, right? So what we have, it's like when the cost is less than some number, some threshold, then we choose, actually I said the other way around. So when it's optimal to have decentralization, when the costs are not that high, right? Because what's matter is how costly it's like to duplicate. Basically the government, right? And this is indeed what we eventually got from the model is that the cost should be less than alpha minus 8, so less than some threshold value.
Excuse me.
Oh, yes.
Could you please repeat what is alpha one more time?
Alpha is just some coefficient, but it reflects how strongly you dislike to live in further from the public good.
Okay.
Right? So you see that the distance from the public good matter, but how strongly it's matter, like whether the people really dislike to live in far away from the public good or just like a little bit dislike it, right? So it's just like yeah, the parameter that represents the dislikeness of people in terms of how far they live from the public good.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the next question is, well, we know what is optimal, right? So now we will need to discuss when people when there is no social planner and people now need to make decision by themselves, what would they choose? Usually in practice, to make decisions like that, people use voting, right? And we will now discuss when decentralization is implemented if majority voting is used. Majority voting is basically if more than half of people live for this thing, then this thing is implemented, right? Uh, we will assume that the decentralized provision prevails when a majority of voters are favorable in at least one region. This is just an assumption, and actually in this story it's not really important, but nevertheless, because of symmetry, we concentrate on the left region. And let me say it, it is easy to see that, yes, it is easily seen that if the central individual in left prefers decentralization, that all the individuals to his left also prefer decentralization. So let us imagine that, right? So imagine left region. Imagine the person, central individuals, right, who sits at the middle, actually, which is 1/4. If he prefers a decentralization, then all the individuals to his left also prefer decentralization. So the logic here is that what's matter is each person kind of, when it's make a choice, it's compared the costs, right? So the cost doubles when a public good is provided by two regions rather than by two governments rather by centralized government. But the benefits is like that you are now start to live closer to the public good. And who actually benefit from when we break down the region and provide the public good within separate regions. Those who lived further away, right? Those who lived closer to the border, right, of the region, right? And because utility functions depends linear on the distance, right? it is that if the central individuals in the, say, left prefer decentralization, that all the individuals to his left also prefer decentralization. Right? The logic I explained to you and the kind of mathematical derivation of this easy to see fact, easy to see step will be discussed at the seminar.
Excuse me.
But then, yes.
Doesn't that mean that if a person at some point prefers decentralization, all people on the right side of the line would also prefer decentralization? So because
Yes,
they are
but only
closer to
on
border.
yeah, on
No?
the left side, right? So yes, you're right, but you probably uh, you said on the right side, but it's actually on the left side, right? Those who are closer to the border, meaning on the left side.
Hmm.
Talked about left region, right?
So those who live at the median one, they are in the center, right? Or not?
Didn't got you. So, but I think what you are trying to say is exactly what we're going to discuss in this slide,
Okay.
right? So let us do that. And then if you still have a question, you will ask it. So there will be a majority in favor of decentralization in the left region if the decisive individual, which is I equal to 1/4, prefer decentralization. Right? So if he prefers decentralization, all the people who eat on the left, right, to the left from him would also prefer decentralization. And that means that decentralization would be a majority vote in equilibrium. Right? So what we are going to do is just to see when it's indeed the case that the person living at 1/4, we call such a person decisive individual, would actually like decentralization more. So for that, we compare the utility of this person under centralization, which is 1 minus alpha multiplied the absolute difference between 1/2 and 1/4, right? 1/2 is where the public is located under centralized provision, and 1/4 is the position of this individual minus cost C. And this should be less or equal the utility of this person living at 1/4 under decentralization, which is 1 minus alpha multiplied the absolute difference between 1/4 and 1/4 minus 2c. Right? If you now calculate from this inequality, actually simplify this inequality, then decentralization is majority vote in equilibrium even only if cost c is less or equal than alpha divided by 4. Okay, what we just did, we simply work with just this decisive individual because we understood that if he preferred decentralization, that all the people to his left also prefer decentralization in the left region. When we talked about right region, it will be like a symmetrical mirror symmetry, right? If in the right region, if the middle point, middle person there, which is person living at 3/4, prefer decentralization, that all people to his right also prefer decentralization.
Okay. So that is the answer to my question.
Okay. Then what we want also to do now, to do here is to compare the social optimum with what we just got here, right? Remember that there it was optimal to choose decentralization when cost was less than alpha divided by 8. And here the people will choose decentralization under majority vote if C less than alpha divided by 4. This means that under majority vote and there is too much decentralization, right? That people will choose decentralization even when C is between A divided by 8 and A divided by 4, right? So which is not optimal, but still will be a majority vote in equilibrium, right? So this is an interesting kind of result because we see that majority of voting, right, might provide an inefficient outcome that yes, basically there will be too much of centralization eventually. So one remark I want to do here is that yes.
Before your remark, so is that the result only for the left region?
Here we need, yes, we didn't discuss this, so thank you. So because of the symmetry, right? So when C is less than alpha divided by 4, it will be also true that the decisive individuals will choose a decentralization over centralization, meaning that the majority of voting will choose decentralization over centralization in the right region also. Right? So the region, they are symmetric. It just like mirror kind of mirror reflection of right region is a mirror reflection of the left region. You can kind of check this mathematically, but intuitively it's like the explanation. And if the left region prefer decentralization, that the right region also would prefer decentralization. But here the story even simpler because we kind of, for simplicity, have this assumption that decentralized provision prevails when the majority of voters are favorable in at least one region. Right? If an assumption like that is given to you, then you can concentrate on what is asked.
Okay,
right?
thank you.
And what I wanted to say is that we were thinking about in this model as it's a geographical locations of the people on the line. But an alternative story behind the model could be that it's not a geographical location, but some preferences of people. Like we can imagine that, let's say, people likes music, and music varies a lot, right? We can rank music, say that like pop music is 0, and then like say rock music is 1, and all I a little bit simplify, right? But like then all the different styles of music is like is a mixture of these two, and then the people prefer different kinds of musics, right? And then we can imagine that people prefer just one kind of music, and it's described by their location. It's kind of not the geographical location, but the preference location among the let's say horizontally different goods, right? And then, right, the same story applies, right? So then the location of the public goods meaning in this example is like what, for example, station the radio translate, right? Right. So, and people decide the kind of whether they should have just one radio broadcast station or just two radio broadcast station, and then location is not just geographical location but a preference location, right?
So this theory, this model can be applied to
Yeah.
different, I know, measure. Let's say so.
Yes, the goods like that called horizontally differentiated goods, right? But like it's the same music, but it's actually not just a music. It's like a variety of musics, right? Different kind of musics, but also there could be usually a lot of good that are horizontally differentiated computers, right? So you like computers with high speed or with good whatever, right? Usually the story is more complicated because there is multiple characteristics that describe the kind of quality, not just the quality, but just the kind of public good, right? But if it could be simplified just to represent it as like a line, right? Two key characteristics of the public good, and then here it's important that it's public good, right? But yeah, but I hope you got the idea, right? Because there could be a lot of examples
Mhm.
there, but the idea is that
So,
okay.
uh, and
Yeah.
I suppose that, of course, it's out of the mm, of our course, but this
Mm-hmm.
theory can be modified um, to n axis, so not just one.
Yeah. So it could be modified to like a lot, right? So like a circle,
Mm,
a star. Like there is a lot of like things that we can play with,
okay.
right? So in terms of like representing that, but it's kind of the simplest,
Hmm.
the simplest model is to kind of bring the idea and to illustrate how we can model that type of things, right?
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, there is like a lot of interesting models there. Okay, with that, I want to move on and to say that the degree of decentralization differ quite substantially between countries. And for us, it's instructive to measure decentralization of public expenditure by function to see whether this is consistent with normative advice. And the normative advice basically is that from a normative point of view, decentralization is desirable when the need to tailor spending to local preferences dominate the possible economies of scale and cross-regional spillovers. So let us look at this table. These tables, a number in this table shows the local expenditures as a percent of total government expenditures by function. By function means whether it's spent on education, health, social welfare, housing, transport. There could be other functions as well. And if we talk, for example, about Austria and 72, right? This number 72 is mean that local expenditures on education constitute 72% of total government expenditures, right? Then the higher the number, meaning the higher the the percent of local expenditures as share of total government expenditures, and the lower the number is correspondingly the higher percent of the centralized government expenditures, right? Because there is, on the one hand, local expenditures, right? The total expenditures, it's either local or centralized, right, by the national government. And so, so the higher is the number, the higher the percent spent by local government, and the lower number is the higher the percent spent by the centralized government. So let us look at France. So, and looked at different functions: education, health, social welfare, housing. You see that when we talked about expenditures on health, right? The number is quite small, just 2. What does it mean? It just, in France, the expenditures on health provided mostly by the centralized government, right? As opposite in Russia, right? This number is 90, which means that in Russia, expenditures on health financed mostly by the local governments, right? So, but if we kind of make a comparison relatively on average between different functions, then we can say that on average, education, health are financed more by local governments compared to the social welfare, and social welfare financed more by centralized government, right? And this is indeed indeed what I want to bring us back to this normative advice, right? That I described to you. Then from normative point of view, decentralization is desirable when the need to tailor spending to local preference dominate the possible economies of scale and cross-regional sprawl. While there is a lot of differences between the country, right? The social welfare, the social welfare is only can, like, what capture this among different countries can also differ, but it's usually a different transfer programs to different groups of people, like poorer people, transfers to poor people, transfers to probably unemployment. So transfers to a group that currently in a like difficult situations, right? And you see that likely, right? So there is much less need to not to that. Right, there is still, like, right, a heterogeneity in terms of what, like social welfare should be designed in one region relative to other region, if we like within one country, right? How compared to how is it important to take in account heterogeneity when we talk about like education. It seems like, right, that there's much more heterogeneity that play a role when we design the expenditures on education rather than when we design expenditures on social welfare, right? And therefore, spending on education is to some extent devoted to a high extent on local governments compared to the social welfare. I hope I explained the basic idea to you to some extent, right? Because like there is again a lot of variation between countries, and there is a lot of factors that actually involves when a decision is actually in practice made. But one of these important factors is like this trade-off, right, between heterogeneity and preferences and economies of scale that government trade-off when they make a decision at which level of government should finance that public good, right? Okay. So let us move on quickly to another thing that we need to discuss. So then the reasonable question arises, where do local government get their fundings? Already we said that they have some local taxes. But in addition to that, there are intergovernmental grants. And intergovernmental grants are the payments from one level of government to another. The purpose of this is basically either redistribution, right? So it's there are rich regions and poor regions in terms of just like natural resources or other economical factors, right? But and the redistribution is just to mitigating this difference. But the other purpose is just risk sharing, because in addition just to this constant difference, the risk could be just economical shocks that affect one region, one industry, and not the other, right? In practice, intergovernmental grants are a significant source of revenue to local government, and in many countries they used, right? But as always, we should question, should there be a redistribution of public fund across local regions, right? And this is indeed a question, because in a pure Tibu world, we would not redistribute across communities, right? So recall Tibu world and think about that. However, in reality, the redistribution from high revenue, high spending communities to low revenue, low spending communities driven by the following arguments. First of all, actually there is a failure of the Tibu mechanism, and poor people could remain stuck in a town with low public good provision. And at the same time, there are externalities, right? The high-level government is called to subsidize spending on local public goods in the communities, providing the externalities, right? If we talk about a positive externality. So this is the logic why we actually do have redistribution in practice. But I want to focus on the second purpose, on the transfers, which is risk sharing, right? And it is this risk sharing provide inter-regional insurance, which mean sharing risk among a group of regions. But for this to be implemented, there are some arrangements are required. Specific risk sharing arrangement requires reciprocal behavior. A region with a favorable shock accepts to help other regions if it can reasonably accept that those regions will in turn help it out in a bad circumstances. Right? So here just like imagine that Simple story, right? There's just two regions, and for one region to be willing to help the other region, it should expect that in future there will be a situation that other region will help this first region, right? Will help you. So the story is usually more complex. In real life, there are several regions involved in risk sharing, and then approximately the necessary conditions for this arrangement can be said that the risk the region bear to some degree should be independent of each other. That is, when one region suffers a loss, there are other regions that do not suffer a loss, right? Because if the risk are dependent and like all regions, like if it's the national crisis, right? So that all the regions suffer loss at the same time, that there is like not much can be done by the like risk sharing redistribution between the regions, right? And the other necessary condition is some symmetry, right? Minimal means some symmetry across region. The reason is that with asymmetric regional distribution of risk, some region will systematically and persistently subsidize others. Asymmetrics mean that other regions are usually in plus, right? So like, and there's a group of regions that usually at minuses, right? And then there's like strong regions and weak regions, and then the strong regions need to help regions, but there's no that a place for voluntary risk sharing, right? Okay. Usually we want to support our story by some modeling. And here's a simple model of voluntary risk sharing. We'll consider two regions, A and B, infinite number of time period. In each period, region receive an income yi, and one of them randomly selected to receive a monetary gain delta with probability 1/2. So the total income is of this two region is fixed, ya plus yb plus delta. And we will describe this region in the following. So assume region are risk averse, meaning the utility of region I from disposable income x is ui of x is concave. And because, right, the total income is constant, which means that with constant aggregate income, risk aversion requires smoothing of regional income across state of the nature. And actually the optimal risk sharing arrangement will call for full insurance, right? Why is that? It's because both regions are better off with optimal risk sharing. So if you looked at these inequalities and simply recall that each utility is concave, right, then the right-hand side is basically the expected utility from being by its own, right? If they are not involved in risk sharing, that this is what they got, 1/2 of utility when you have a gain plus 1/2 utility when you don't have gain. But this is always less because of concavity of utility than utility of a smoothed income, which is your income, say it's region A, ya plus 1/2 of gain delta, right? Okay, but for risk sharing arrangement to be a kind of an equilibrium of a model, it should be that this that it is self-enforcing, that is, no region has incentive to deviate from the agreement. So sorry, I'm over the time. Uh, I probably will have a couple more minutes to run through the slides I have here, and forgive me. So let TA be the transfer made by region A to the other region when region A received the gain delta. But region A have incentive to deviate and not transfer this TA when its income is YA plus delta, right? When he has receives a gain, it doesn't want to transfer any money. But if there is a punishment for deviation, like excluding from any future insurance arrangement, that's like risk sharing arrangement can be supported as an equilibrium. So let us assume the discount factor is delta, and let us compare the expected utility from two strategies. First strategy is that region indeed honors the agreement. So let's say region A, when he receives a gain, he indeed transfer TA to other region. The other strategy would be to deviate, right? And we want to write down the expected utility for the first and the second strategies, but then we want that the expected utility for honoring the agreement should be higher than from deviation from the agreement. And if it's like that, then we can support risk sharing agreement as indeed as an equilibrium, right? So let me explain you what is where the expected utility from the honoring agreements come from. This is equation 7. So in the period when a region receives a gain, his utility is, and if he follows the agreement, his utility is UA of income YA plus delta minus TA, right? But then we need to calculate his utility from all the future periods. And his utility on all the future periods is the same. Therefore, when we sum that, we will end up with this coefficient delta divided by 1 minus delta. Just like check me on that. And it's multiplied the expected utility of in a future period, which is 1/2 with probability 1/2 you receive gain delta and gives transfer TA, so your utility is UA of YA plus delta minus T, plus with probability 1/2 you don't receive the gain in the future, right, in the same period too. But then the region B will give you transfer TB so that utility is UA of YA plus TB. Alternatively, the region's expected utility if he deviates is UAYA plus delta, so he does not give any transfers now, but then in the future there is no he punished and there is no agreement, so what he got is just whatever is basically 1/2 UA plus of YA plus delta plus 1/2 of UA YA, right? And this is with coefficient delta divided by 1 minus delta, because this is in all future periods, right?
So we
Yes.
suppose that the probability of mm, let's call it a crisis in region B situation. So when our region is giving some money to the other, is equal to um, 0.5, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And what we have to do is to check that region A has no incentive to deviate, right? For that, we want to find when expression in equation 7 is greater than expression in equation 8, right? So this condition is given by equation 9, and similar we can do the same steps for region B to check that he has no incentive to deviate, and by analogy an equation for region B is written, and it's equation 10. So from this equation we can get some interesting implication that when delta converges to 0, the value of future insurance is 0 and regions always deviate, right? So if it does not value future, there is no point to be involved in risk sharing arrangement, kind of intuitive. When delta converges to 1, the value of future insurance is sufficiently high that full insurance is possible, right? Also kind of reasonable and intuitive. And for intermediate discounting factors, when delta lies between some delta low bar and delta upper bar, then only limited insurance is possible. So let us check this first implication. Then when delta converges to 0, there is no future insurance, value of future insurance. So let's look at this expression 9. So when delta converges to 0, basically let's plug in 0 into this expression. Then on the left hand side we end up with just the first term, right? And on the right hand side we also will end up with the first term. And we immediately see that then left hand side can never be higher than the right hand side for any positive TA, right? So then also you can check the other two implications, right? At least the second implications as well. So sorry again, I'm over the time then, but I'm done. And thank you so much. If you have any questions, please write down me an email. Okay, guys, let's finish.
Okay. Thank you for your lecture. Goodbye.
Bye bye.